And now Editorials Watch this week focuses on two issues relating to China. The first is related to China's Nobel Prize Peace Laureate winner Liu Xiaobo, and the second is related to China's ongoing diplomatic spat with Japan. More on this report.
A recent New York Times editorial condemned the imprisonment of Mr. Liu as another instance of the Chinese government's history of throwing its weight around and using intimidation tactics to silence their dissidents. The October 8th article by the New York Times editorial team denounces the actions of Beijing by saying that maybe someone in the Chinese government will now figure out that bullying is not a strategy for an aspiring world power. The article said, Mr. Liu and the Chinese should be proud. Beijing, however, should be ashamed. Meanwhile, Frank Ching, a professor of architecture and design at the University of Washington, wrote in an opinion editorial piece published by Malaysia's New Straits Times on October 7th that the Nobel Peace Prize is a major morale boost for dissidents in China, who have suffered from ever-increasing repression. The ASEAN TV news team feels that the cries for more human rights in China will continue to be ignored by Beijing, so long as many of the world powers depend on China and their economic rise. However, the achievements of dissidents like Mr. Liu are a good example of how the calls for increasing human rights can be heard around the world, even behind the walls of a closed society.
The second issue in this week's Editorials Watch is related to the Sino-Japanese relation. The China Economic Review, a monthly magazine published in Hong Kong, wrote in its editorial section for the October issue that the latest diplomatic spat between China and Japan over the disputed waters of Diaoyu Sankaku Islands was a result of Japan being irritated by China's new assertiveness in economics. The article points out that while only 16% of China's export products directly competed with Japanese export, many Chinese companies are now increasingly competing for share with Japanese high-tech exports with direct state support. Further, Beijing has been purchasing a lot of Japanese bond, resulting in a driving up of the value of the yen. Factors such as these, the China Economic Review's editorials argues, explain Tokyo's strong reaction after the Chinese fishing boat collided with two Japanese Coast Guard vessels in the East China Sea in early September. In short, the China Economic Review's editorial argues that the arrest of the Chinese fishing boat captain was part of Tokyo's calculated plan to retaliate Beijing's power assertion and to curb China's influence in the region. Meanwhile, the India-based Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, or IDSA, argues in an article published in the Spanish publication Eurasia Review on 19th of October that the recent assertion of Beijing's power in Asia is part of China's long-term strategy in building itself up to become a global power. IDSA points out that the Chinese Communist Party has planned since the 1950s to gain controls of the East and South China Sea, and since then has slowly worked towards these goals, resulting in the recent tensions with countries like Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan. IDSA, the think tank funded by the Indian Ministry of Defense, also points out that China's recent political and diplomatic exertions has been backed up with military posturing, and that other littoral states near East and South China Seas, as well as the United States, have been at the receiving end of China's fiery diplomacy. The IDSA calls for a formation of a defensive alliance between the US, Japan, Australia, India, and Vietnam to curb China's influences in Asia in the future. ASEAN TV News team feels that a new power-sharing platform needs to be worked out and established by all the stakeholders in Asia security, including the US and China, enabling all concerned parties to exercise their power more constructively and provide an arena where tension can be resolved through multilateral negotiation. This type of proactive diplomacy will help improve Asia's security outlook and goes a long way in assisting countries in East and Southeast Asia to form an enduring sense of community with shared goals and purposes similar to the one existed in Europe. ASEAN TV News team feels that the current global power play is being dominated by old-school Cold War mentality, and what is needed is a new approach. The trick now is, of course, to get all stakeholders to agree to such a platform. Thai News Agency team reporting for this edition of ASEAN TV's Editorials Watch.